Joining me now, John Jordan, a former Naval Intelligence officer and also an overseer at Stanford's Hoover Institution. John, for decades we have heard that in order to come up with some kind of a Middle East peace deal, you've got to solve the battle between the Israelis and the Palestinians. This agreement would seem to put the lie to that.
Absolutely. Circumstances have changed. It's not very often that you get to see the history of an entire region rewritten, and that's been in the works for a while. Right now, what we have is the realignment in the region driven by the aggressiveness of the Iranian regime and the fear that many of these Arab states, including the Gulf states, have of the Iranian regime, and that has subsumed the Palestinian issue, which has defined the Arab-Israeli conflict since 1948.
The president surprised a lot of people when this deal was announced. Up till now, you've had Egypt and Jordan as the only Arab countries who have made a peace deal with Israel. The UAE is a fairly small country, but it is a wealthy one. How significant is this deal in your view?
Well, this is only the third country. There was Egypt in 1979, for which Jimmy Carter got a Nobel Prize. There was Jordan in 1994 with President Clinton, and now the UAE. The UAE is the only Gulf state to sign a peace treaty with Israel, or at least to have diplomatic relations. My sources tell me, John, that this is just the beginning. Right now, elected officials, politicians, and intelligence services throughout the world are looking at reactions from the Arab street to see how public opinion in the Arab world reacts to this. If there is, in fact, kind of a whole lot of nothing, there isn't these giant uprisings or huge protests to this, you're going to see other countries start to follow suit. Look for Oman, Bahrain, and Morocco possibly next. Saudi Arabia is a different animal. My sources say there's a lot afoot there as well, even though that may be a little further down the line. And this may, in fact, be the October world-changing event, which constitutes an October surprise going into the election.
Yeah, we see Benjamin Netanyahu in the video that we just had up on screen, sitting there in the Oval Office with President Trump. He, for one, says, well, he echoes your optimism that other Arab nations are going to follow suit. Listen to the Prime Minister.
This is the greatest advancements toward peace between Israel and the Arab world in the last 26 years, and it marks the third formal peace between Israel and an Arab nation. In recent years, Israel, under my leadership, has made advancement with ties with such countries as Sudan, Oman, Bahrain, and other nations in the Gulf. I have reason to be very optimistic that today's announcement with the UAE will be followed by more Arab nations joining our region's circle of peace.
The Arabs seem to be seeing Israel as less of a threat than Iran is to their well-being.
Well, yes, Iran has become a huge threat. This has its genesis largely with the Iran nuclear deal, which, ironically, Joe Biden's trying to take credit for this week's success. But the Iran nuclear deal basically allowed the Iranians to have tens of billions of dollars with which they could fund terror activities and destabilization activities throughout the Middle East, including the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. It allowed them to proceed with their development of delivery systems or rockets for their nuclear weapons program, unhindered and unfettered, and put them on a glide path to having a deliverable nuclear weapon on which they could place atop one of those rockets by 2025. This poses an existential issue for a lot of these Arab countries as Iran seeks to become the hegemon in the region. And this is exacerbated by the Sunni-Shia split within the Islamic world, as well as the Persian-Arab ethnic rift.
Well, if this is an October surprise, it certainly will be welcomed by the Trump campaign and the White House. John Jordan, former Naval Intelligence officer, also an overseer at Stanford's Hoover Institution. John, thanks.